What I would tell the person about race in America is that, yes, at one point in American history, race was a big defiant of who you were. If you were white or black, then they would completely treat you differently just depending on how your race was and how you looked. And I feel like over the years it has gotten better to the point now where when I go to school, people just joke around about it. It's not like a really big deal because it's your personality and who you are more than what you look like and what race you came from. I mean, that doesn't define who you are as a person.
Is the American dream a reality for me?
Because if I fail, that means I failed my race.
How does immigration impact the American dream?
Your Fellow Americans is a project asking questions about race, immigration, and the American dream. We're just trying to figure out what it means to be American for as many different folks as possible. In March of 2015, the Your Fellow Americans team met with the Filipino-American family. We joined them around the dinner table as they discussed race, immigration, and the American dream.
Is that right, Sophie? Mom is strict, just like grandma.
Mom is
but
strict.
it keeps you, well disciplined. Yeah. And when you have your own family, you have learned the tricks of how your kids would be successful too.
I am interested to know if these guys see themselves, like when somebody asks you at school, what are you? Does anyone ever ask what's your ethnic background, or how is that? Matt, does anyone ask you that
Yes.
in school? What do you say?
They think I'm Mexican.
They think you're Mexican.
For racism, discrimination, occasionally I'll get a couple hints from my friends that they're being a little bit racist, but mostly I just push them off as jokes. It's more of when I get a good grade and someone next to me doesn't, and they just happen to be a different race. They're like, oh, you only got that because you're Asian, and not because I worked hard for it or anything.
Like, there's this one kid that was in my Spanish class, I remember, and like, because I've known him since 5th grade after we moved, and he was in my Spanish class, and then he came up to me, he's like, oh, why are you taking Spanish class? I'm like, because I want to learn a language. He's like, but aren't you Mexican? I'm like, no, I'm Asian. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm Filipino. They're like, Filipino's not Asian. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's a Pacific Islander off the coast of Asia.
So that's interesting that you said you're Asian, though.
So I'm white. Because you're 50.
Because you're actually half.
White and half Filipino.
It's so funny because my girls, they kind of resemble his side of the family, but people think they look like me because they have my coloring. And they identify themselves as being Filipino, which is very opposite to me growing up, because we were surrounded by white people, so we wanted to be white. Whereas my children, I think they're very proud of their difference from everybody else.
If one of my friends were to ask me, what are you? I would first say Filipino, and then I'd be like, but I'm half Filipino and I'm half white.
Well, because like our white side probably has a bunch of other races like German, Irish, mixed into it. So I guess that would make us more Filipino than we are white.
I don't really feel that my kids being biracial will have any negative impact on them. I think the main thing that matters as far as whether they're a success or not is how they treat others and the confidence they have in themselves and their values and hard work.
Everyone knows that there is lots of issue between white officers and the black or Afro-American population, and to me it's kind of worsening on the recent years.
I think it's mostly white and black.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. So I'm not concerned about my grandkids. I'm not concerned about it.
Yes.
And I was never concerned even when my kids were new here. I was not concerned about it. If you ask my children, when we were in Elkhart, they didn't even know that there's a difference between their classmates and them.
No one ever pointed out that we were Asian. No one said anything slang. It was interesting because it was a farming community. There were just over 2,000 people.
We feel fortunate because we're doctors. We were really respected in Elkhart. And we really didn't feel like they were discriminating against us.
I was actually in interracial relationships and had no idea that it was interracial because, I thought I was the same, and it was interesting. So after you leave your small little community, and you realize that, oh, I guess I am different, and I'm supposed to go join the Asian clubs or whatever it is in college.
The race in America actually is not as bad as when we came in, because we have friends who went to Alabama and they practiced there. There was segregation. The whites stay in one part of the office and the blacks stay in one part. And it was a big surprise for them. But now it's not. So, I'm kind of questioning the fact about all the other problems that we're having now. Some of the race are complaining about being treated unfairly. Maybe there is some truth to it, but not to the extent of what they're saying now.
I think coming from somebody of a minority background, I think it's easier for me to discuss it than probably a Caucasian to say it. But racism, I feel, has kind of switched. I feel there's probably more of a problem with reverse racism nowadays than, with the Caucasian race having negative feelings about minorities. I think sometimes an individual uses that as an excuse not to succeed. And I think maybe that comment's kind of harsh and not everybody may agree with me, but like I said, coming from a different country, seeing, growing up with that and still being able to take advantage of everything this country has to offer, when I hear things like that, using that as an excuse, I feel in that regard, I think the reverse racism is a lot worse now than what it was growing up. So I think in the United States, it doesn't matter on the status of life. You can be born into a poor family, you can get scholarships, you study, you work hard. I think outside of the country, it's just so much more difficult for the poor to really elevate themselves out of that status.
Do I think racism affects the ability to achieve the American dream? I think racism, there's always going to be a factor of racism. But I think it's not as, I think it's the cultural problems are what holds people back. It's more systemic than people being, the police force being racist. And I think what they're not reporting or talking about is the cultural problems that are happening in those communities. Those kids that are growing up in whatever culture that is. I don't want to say the black culture, but those inner city areas where those problems are, whether they're black or Hispanic or Italian or whatever, where those high statistics of crime and murders and where those things are happening, it's not because of racism, it's because of how they're growing up, the values that they're learning from their parents, or the lack of parents, or the supervision, or the morals that they're not being taught, or that is the problem. And that leads to the higher mortality rates and the higher crime rates and the higher drug use and the prostitution and the murders, and that's what that leads to. And really, how do you get out of that? You hear people who are in good situations, like we're in a good situation. They say, well, why don't they just get out of there? Where do you go? How do you do that? So, you get stuck there.
Do you get to decide how you're labeled, or are you defined by what others say about you? Does emphasis on skin color and race take the public eye off of cultural and economic problems? Do people remain in poverty because they don't know how to get out, or because they can't get out? Let's talk about it. Comment below or visit kcpt.org/yourfellowamericans.